Hello, my name is Marianne Pellegrino. I'm past co-chair of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Breakfast Committee. I want to thank our wonderful sponsors, especially those at the silver, gold, and platinum levels. Without their generous support, we would not be able to give to the community-based programs.
Thank you to our silver sponsors who made a minimum $100 donation. Thank you to our gold sponsors who made a minimum $250 donation. The Brandford Community Foundation, Peter and Lee Stolzman, Evans Memorial AME Zion Church of Norwich, Connecticut, the Parthenon Diner and Restaurant, and Sofer Farms. Thank you to our platinum sponsors who made a minimum $500 donation. St. Stephen's AME Zion Church of Brantford, the Rotary Club of Brantford, Key Bank, and the First Congregational Church of Brantford.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven rings. Ring with the harmonies of liberties. Let our rejoicings rise as the listening skies. Let us march on till victory is won. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark man has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on to victory is won. Is won.
Hi, my name is Phoebe Chandler, former co-chair of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Breakfast Committee. I want to welcome you all to the 36th annual celebration honoring the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King.
Prayer was the sacred life of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Prayer was the foundation of his calling to serve as a prophetic social witness. He laid his soul before God, praying for strength and guidance. In Martin Luther King Jr.'s spirit, we now pray. Good God, we ask you to listen to us, to guide us, and to give us strength to influence the events which surround us in these difficult times. Renew us with the spirit of sacrificial love, exemplified in the life of Dr. King. Dr. King once said that he had a dream. We ask you, Lord, to help us to dream big and to rethink our priorities, what we value, what we want, what we need, and to commit to act to our daily life on what we have dreamed of, a fair and just society. Good Lord, you ask us to dare to create something new. Help us to create economies that give all people access to the fruits of creation and to the basic needs of life. Help us to resist racial injustice everywhere we see it, even within ourselves. Let us work to design better ways of living on this earth as people with a shared dignity and a shared destination. We can only be human together. By your goodness, good God, at work within us, brokenness can be healed. As we venture forth to be women and men of your service, go before us as our guide. May we be the vessels of hope and justice in a world inundated with countless forms of injustices. Help us to walk with eyes open to see the needs of our communities, with ears open to hear the needs of others, and with hands open to helpful service to all people. Then we will not only be blessed, but we will be a blessing to our world. With your help, good God, we can build a better, different human future. Amen.
The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Breakfast Committee chose as its theme this year, I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear. This was given in a speech on August 16, 1967, at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Dr. King says, I'm concerned about a better world. I'm concerned about justice. I'm concerned about brotherhood. I'm concerned about truth. And when one is concerned about that, he can never advocate violence. For through violence, you may murder a murderer, but you can't murder murder. Through violence, you may murder a liar, but you can't establish truth. Through violence, you may murder a hater, but you can't murder hate through violence. Darkness cannot put out darkness. Only light can do that. He continues, I have decided to stick with love, for I know that love is ultimately the only answer to mankind's problems.
We are a community-based organization that came into being as an outgrowth of the third Sunday community breakfasts hosted by St. Stephen's AME Zion Church. In 1985, 2 years after President Reagan declared Dr. King's birthday a national holiday, Mr. Robert Burns and Mr. Colin Rouse began celebrating Dr. King's birthday at the church with a breakfast. A year later, the pastor, Reverend Charles H. Woody Jr., involved the Brandford clergy, and the celebration progressed into a community-wide event that included games, music, and a prayer service. Approximately 30 years ago, Father Raymond Barry allowed the event to be held at St. Teresa's Church to accommodate the larger crowds until we outgrew that space. Thankfully, Brandford High School had opened its doors to welcome this annual event until COVID-19. Community leaders and invited guests, such as our moderator, have spoken at this annual event discussing Dr. King's message. We are now a diverse group of community people dedicated to preserving the memory and the teachings of Dr. King. This year, we embark on a new venture, a Zoom presentation. While you have been invited to our virtual celebration, we urge you to take the lessons of today to heart and challenge yourself to do a little better each day in the direction of becoming a better human being, for we can all get better. And now I turn to our moderator. Keith Kuntz has been an institution in Connecticut. For more than 2 decades, he has been invited into our homes as the anchor of Good Morning Connecticut and the Noon News. He has received more than 50 professional and community service awards in that time, culminating in the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences Silver Circle Award. It is with great pleasure that I present Keith Kuntz.
Peter, thank you very much. And I want to thank everybody for being with us over Zoom this morning. We are going to have a wonderful program, and we are really stressing involvement from everybody who's in our watching audience, our viewing audience. So we're really going to have an exceptional morning, and we're going to honor Dr. King and think about a lot of the issues that Dr. King worked so hard to deal with in our society. We will soon be hearing from renowned social justice activist Jane Elliott, and we are really looking forward to hearing from Mrs. Elliott. If you don't know a lot about her, you're really going to be overwhelmed by the presentation she's going to give you. So that's what we're really looking forward to. Also, later on in the program, we're going to hear from the Brandford music makers of Brandford High School, and they'll be performing for us later. So we look forward to hearing from them as well this morning during the program. And also, this is very important. If you have questions for Jane Elliott, please make sure to write in your questions. We'll be trying to pass along and get as many questions in the mix as possible for the next couple of hours so we can get you as involved in the program as much as possible. Now, who exactly is Jane Elliott? Let her tell you right now in her own words.
The word educator comes from the root ductus, which means lead, the prefix e, which means out, the suffix ate, which means the act of, and the suffix or, which means one who does. An educator is one who ought to be, who must be, in the act of leading people out of ignorance, and that's what I do. I had the most sane, rational, moral, not exactly Christian, but Christian, convinced Christian, but just a good human being for a father. And I turn into a soup sandwich every time I talk about him, because he was absolutely remarkable. He was the best example of a human being that I've ever known.
That's great.
It was, I can't imagine a better father.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. It isn't possible.
So what was it? What did he do? What did he instill in you? Is that where you got your strength from?
You know, that's where you got your
motivation?
strength. That's where you got your commitment.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you got your honesty. That's where you got your ambition. That's where you got your compassion. That's where you got your realization that he would say every time you turned around, you don't judge a book by its cover, goddammit. And he lived by that. And watched me become what I became, and didn't really understand what that was all about until I showed him the film of Blue-Eyed, Brown-Eyed film. The first one was made in my classroom. The first year, we did the exercise in April. And then that September, I had a new group of third graders, and I did the exercise with them in October. And I showed it to my mother and my father. And when it was over, he stood up and he took his red handkerchief out of the back pocket of his blue bib overalls, mm-hmm. and he wiped his nose, he wiped his eyes, and he blew his nose, and he said, "I wish somebody had taught me that when I was 9 years old." I hadn't seen him cry since my little sister died in our house. Absolutely. The gem of his life was that little girl, and she died in front of, there I was. And I never saw him cry after that until he saw that film. Mm. And then he was absolutely sold on what those kids learned. He wished somebody had taught him that when he was 9 years old.
Yeah.
And I do too.
Jane Elliott joining us live from California. Want to start by saying thank you so much for being here, and I know you're up early, so we appreciate you getting up. Appreciate you getting up early to be with us here in Connecticut this morning. Let me start with what's going on right now in 2021, and over the last couple of weeks, we've seen that horrible scene at the U.S. Capitol building. Given the environment we're in right now, do you still remain hopeful at this point?
Absolutely. Just as the George Floyd tragedy galvanized people into action against what white people didn't realize was happening. What happened last week and will be galvanizing people into action against the people who are pulling this kind of nonsense. You need to realize that I just heard this morning, early this morning, I got up at 3 o'clock I'm not a happy person, but 73% of the ugliness has stopped since they took Trump off Twitter. Now, do you realize the influence that social media has on us? If we could do away with some of the stuff that's on social media, we could change this thing around. We could start telling the truth. We aren't telling the truth. The people went into the street in massive numbers after the killing of George Floyd because finally white people could no longer deny that this was happening. They were shocked and astounded at what was going on. What didn't occur to them is people of color have been watching that in their neighborhoods for the last 235 years. This was nothing new to people of color. This was just finally there was some young woman with a telephone there who witnessed the whole thing and filmed it. So it forced us to see reality. My reality as a melanemic person, and I try not to use the word white because white is a misnomer. I'm not white. My shirt is white. Well, it used to be, but it's gotten old. My hair is white. It didn't used to be, but I got old. But my skin is not white. You need to realize this is not white skin, people. There are no white people on the face of the earth unless you have severe albinism. And if you want to know what that's all about, Google Tanzania and see what happens to people who are albinos in Tanzania. It will blow you away. It will blow you out of the water when you realize that we have used the wrong words to describe people for far too long. I can look at a person who says he or she is black, look at their hair and see where their hair ends and their skin begins. We are people, we are different shades of brown. You need to realize that.
Mrs. Elliott, how much progress have you seen in your lifetime? You had the famous exercise in discrimination the day after Dr. King was assassinated. So you've seen a lot, you've been to a lot of places. What has been the extent of change in your mind that we've seen?
I thought when Barack Obama was elected that we were making progress, and I thought I'd never have to do that blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise again. What I didn't realize and didn't make allowances for was the fact that 40% of the electorate in this country was just waiting until they got that black man out of the White House so that they could get someone into the presidency who would support their ugly, racist, sexist, ageist, homophobic, ethnocentric beliefs and practice what they had been preaching. We have made tragic steps backward in the last 4 years. We are in worse shape now than we were in the 60s. And this is absolutely the result of the misuse of television and the misuse of social media. I want to form an organization called TOTT, T-O-T-T, Take Out Television. It's time for us to take out television and start reading. If we'd start reading, we could learn enough to. The problem with most of us is we suffer from self-imposed ignorance. We don't have to be ignorant about race. We don't have to be ignorant about the fact that there's only one race on the face of the earth, and that's the human race. You and I are members of the same race. You and I are 30th to 50th cousins because we both have the same ancestor back there 300,000 to 500,000 years ago. This idea of race is a lie. We need to get over it.
Are you saying that the way 99% of us are taught in school is incorrect? We're not learning the right things, enough of the right things?
I'd say that 100% of what we're taught in school. Yeah, if I wish it were 99%, but it isn't. The vast majority of people in this country have been taught the rightness of whiteness, have been taught that we've been taught that Columbus discovered America. Do you not realize that black people, what we call black people, melanaceous people, came from countries of Africa 20,000 to 10,000 years before the birth of Christopher Columbus? We don't celebrate the fact that this continent was discovered by people from a country in Africa. It's time to start teaching the truth. Black History Week month. We have Black History Month. That's ridiculous. You would have to have something every day about Black if you were going to teach Black history. Every child and every educator, not teachers. Teachers don't have to know much. Educators have to know a lot. The word educator comes from the root dus, which means lead, the prefix e, which means out, the suffix ate, which means the act of, and the suffix or, which means one who does. An educator is one who is leading people out of ignorance. You can't do that by teaching that there are 3 or 4 different races or that Columbus discovered America. Get the book, get Anthony Browder's book, Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization. And you will find out that most of the wonderful things we got from Egyptians came to us from people of color. Egypt is a country on the continent of Africa. It is not in the Middle East, but we call it part of the Middle East because that way we don't have to admit that many of the wonderful things we have came to us from people of color. We've got to change what's happening in education, and we've got to change it now.
Jane, I want to get to a question that we've got from one of our audience members who was asking, you made sacrifices, took risks that not only affected you, but your family and those you love. How and why did you make these choices in your life?
Number one, I made no sacrifices. Make no mistake about this. Every black, so-called black mother, every melanaceous mother in this country makes sacrifices every day to send her child to school into a situation where that child is going to be seen as less than because of the ignorance of the educators in the system. What I didn't make sacrifices. I gave up some things that weren't all that valuable after all. It was tough on my kids. So when the high school principal, the elementary principal's wife, who taught at the high school, came to me at a teachers meeting one day and said, Jane, you've got to get your kids out of this school. These teachers are trying to destroy your children. Mm-hmm. At that point, I realized that I had to get them out. So we moved. I continued to teach there, but we got the kids into a different school so they didn't have to be destroyed by their instructors who were hired and paid to treat them fairly. I found out that you didn't have to be a person of color in a small town, anywhere, or in a neighborhood, anywhere in the United States to be treated like a person of color. We know how to treat those who don't represent what we feel is right. My kids found out something about how it felt to be treated badly because of people's ignorance about skin color and their determination to maintain their ignorance. They would do anything they could to shut me up. I didn't sacrifice anything. What I did was refuse to tolerate the intolerable. And Elie Wiesel said, you must not tolerate the intolerable. If it is intolerable for another person, you have to put a stop to it. And that's what I do.
Could you walk us through the blue eyes, brown eyes experiment for those people who don't know, or exercise? I want to get the terminology right. Exercise. Can you walk our audience through it, exactly what it was, what you were trying to achieve by doing it?
Okay, I learned about the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise from Adolf Hitler. I was born in 1933, the year that he and Franklin Roosevelt came to power. And one of the ways they decided who went into the gas chamber was eye color. So the night after Martin Luther King Jr. was killed, I'll never forget that night. I can't even talk about it without getting sick to my stomach. I decided, after watching the wonderful people on television put down the black leaders, the leaders of the black community that night, the next day, our lesson plan, which was to learn the Sioux Indian prayer that says, "Oh, Great Spirit, keep me from ever judging a man until I've walked a mile in his moccasins." I decided that not only was I going to teach them that prayer, I was going to arrange to have it answered for them. I decided that the next morning I was going to let my little all-white, all-Christian third graders find out what it felt like to be a child of color in the United States of America. I was going to divide them according to the color of their eyes. I was going to treat the right color eyes as superior and the wrong color eyes as inferior. And I was going to let them experience what racism is really all about. I didn't know how this exercise would work. If I had known how it would work, I probably wouldn't have done it. If I had known.
What was the result? What was the result?
Well, it was awful. For the kids, it was wonderful. For my kids, it wasn't so good. I went into my classroom. We talked about the killing of Martin Luther King Jr. because he had been one of our heroes of the month in February. And I finally said to them, do you kids have any idea? What do you know about blacks? They knew every negative stereotype I've ever heard and some that I had never heard. And these are all white kids in an all white community. I finally said, how do you kids know these things are true? Almost in a chorus, they said, because my dad said so. Fathers, be careful what you say around your children. They'll listen to it and they'll learn it. I separated them according to the color of their eyes. I put the blue-eyed people in the back, the brown-eyed people in the front. I told them that blue-eyed people aren't as smart as brown-eyed people. They aren't as clean as brown-eyed people. They aren't as civilized as brown-eyed people. You give blue-eyed people something nice, and what do? Immediately, they said they tear it up. And then they pointed to blue-eyed children who had made mistakes and done silly things in the classroom. And I thought that was all it was going to be. But then little brown-eyed Debbie sitting in the front row, 9 years old, looked up at me and said, how come you're the teacher here if you got them blue eyes? And I thought, and there it is.
Wow.
There it is. This child has the right to confront me, to contradict me, to disagree with me, because now she has the power of eye color. Oh my God, how can this be? And have I contributed to this? And then I watched my brown-eyed people become what I had taught them to be. They became arrogant. They became domineering. They became judgmental. They became all the things that so-called white people have been and continue to be in this country. And I watched brilliant blue-eyed children who could not function academically on the day they were on the bottom of that exercise. It was absolutely astounding. I had 4 dyslexic brown-eyed boys in my class that year. Those boys, on the day they were on the top in that exercise, read words I knew they couldn't read and spelled words I knew they couldn't spell. And at the end of the day, brown-eyed Billy Thompson came up to my desk and said, "Mrs. Elliott, where's my spelling paper?" I said, "What do you want it for, Billy?" He said, "I want to take it home and show it to my mother. She thinks I can't spell, and I can." And then he cried and I cried, because he had been living down to my expectations of him, and I based my expectations of him on the kinds of things that his previous teachers said about him in the teacher's lounge of the Riceville Community Elementary School. Now, there should be a sign over the door of every teacher's lounge at every school in the United States of America, and it should say, "Watch your mouth. You have no right to discuss children in those teachers' lounges." And after that experience, when I went down, I stopped the exercise. I was going to stop the exercise at noon. So I went down to the teachers' lounge because horrible things were happening in my classroom. I went to the teachers' lounge because I needed some support. I went into the teachers' lounge. There were probably 10 teachers in there, including the other 2 third-grade teachers. I told them what was happening in my classroom the day after Martin Luther King Jr. was killed. When I had finished telling them what was going on, the younger of those other two teachers said, "I don't know how you have time for all that extra stuff. It's all I can do to teach reading, writing, arithmetic." Well, she hadn't taught reading, writing, and arithmetic as far as I was concerned. She might as well have done the extra stuff. In fact, if you talk about the 3 R's, you have to realize that only one of those words begins with R, and that's reading. Writing begins with W, and arithmetic begins with A. Let's get over it. We need to start teaching the 3 R's of rights, respect, and responsibility. After I had finished telling those teachers what was going on, the first one said she didn't know why I did that. The other one said, and was over 60 years old, had been molding young minds for many years in that area, said, "I don't know why you're doing that. I thought it was about time somebody shot that son of a bitch." And that is exactly what she said. No teacher frowned. No teacher said, "Helen, you could lose your job for that." No teacher said, "How dare you make such a statement?" Every one of those teachers either smiled or laughed and nodded. She had expressed their feelings perfectly, and as the most senior member of the group, she had the most right to do so. Now, did I just learn from the children? I learned from those teachers. I learned how not to teach. I learned how not to react to statements like such as, "It's all right not to be white." I learned what those teachers didn't know and what they didn't have to know. And you can only teach what you know. And if you don't know any better than to be a racist, you can't teach better than to be a racist. I went back to my classroom.
What was
Go
the
on.
reaction from parents? Parents of these kids?
Parents of the children who were in my classroom had no problem with it. In fact, in years after that, they came to me and said, "Thank you for what you did to my son. You changed the way we live at our home." One mother came and said, "I'm so glad you did that exercise with my child, because my mother-in-law always used the N-word. And last time she was at our house, my daughter, who was in your class, stopped and said, 'Grandma, we don't use that word in our house. And if you're going to use that word, I'm going to go outside until you go home.'" Now, I didn't teach that child much about respect for her elders. I did teach her something about elders that you can't respect because of the way they behave and the words they use.
If you did that same experiment today in 2021, do you think the finding would be very much different?
5 years ago, it would have been different. Now, after 4 years of the kind of leadership that says that it's right to lie and to cheat and to steal and to discriminate against people on the basis of physical characteristics over which they have no control. Now I could use that exercise because of the way we behaved in the last 4 years, and it would work exactly the way it did in 1968. However, you need to realize that we are still doing in this country, we're still using the skin color exercise. The skin color exercise is the same as the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise, except you base it on skin color. And after you've been through the exercise, you recognize it when it's happening and you refuse to go along with it. That isn't what happens in society at large. People, melanemic people, which is a word I use for white people, because if you don't have enough iron in your blood to keep you healthy, you're called anemic. If you don't have enough melanin in your skin to protect your cells from the rays of the sun, you must be melanemic. White and black are polar opposites. We've got no right to call people white and black. White is the color of purity and goodness. Black is the color of evil and savagery. Those two terms were chosen during the Spanish Inquisition. They should never have been chosen, and they should never be used today, because they do not tell the truth about human beings. Everybody needs to get the National Geographic magazine, this magazine, for April of 2018. You see these two girls?
Yes,
Obviously, would you call them biracial?
I would think so. Yes.
Don't ever do it again. Both of their parents came from Earth. Every human being on the face of the earth is a member of the human race, Homo sapiens. These girls are not biracial. You couldn't be biracial unless one of their parents came from outer space. These girls are mosaic. A mosaic is an art form that is new and beautiful and unique and made of many different elements. And that's what these girls are. But get this magazine and read this magazine. It is a very short description of what racism is, how it started, and what we need to do to get over it. Look at this map.
Okay.
In
that-
this,
that- Jane, that brings me to a question that we have from Margot. And her question is, maps tell us a lot about our place in the world. Do you agree?
well, yeah, but first you have to look at this map. This
Okay.
map tells us why we have a place in the world. According to this map, and this is National Geographic, these people know what they're doing. Human beings started here, and those brilliant dark-skinned persons who were dark-skinned because their bodies were exposed to a lot of sunlight, those brilliant persons managed to populate every landmass on the face of the earth without any modern technology. That is the kind of that's the kind of human beings that we all came from. Right there it is. Stop this nonsense. Another thing about maps, we have in this country accustomed everyone to using the Mercator projection map. See this lovely thing?
Yeah, we all
See?
grew up with that map.
Absolutely. No, we all grew older with this map.
Okay.
Those who grow up, give it up. All right. See Greenland hanging down here like a great big ripe plum in the middle of this map. Greenland on this map is bigger than South America, and it's bigger than Africa. This map was, the person who drew this map, Mercator, was commissioned by the Pope to make a map that showed the spread of Christianity. So the countries on the northern part of this map are larger than the countries in the southern part of the map. On this map, the equator, which is supposed to be halfway between the North Pole and the South Pole, is 2/3 of the way down the map. So you need to realize that you can't use the word equator. You can use the word equator, but you can't use northern hemisphere because hemi means half. This isn't half of this map. This is 2/3 of this map. This is racist education. If you're going to teach a map, you need to get the Peters projection map. Arlo Peters drew this map, and it is fair to all the peoples of the world. Look at Greenland on this map, and then look at South America, and then look at Africa.
Right.
On the Mercator map at the bottom of the map, the last sentence in the legend says, South America is actually 9 times larger than Greenland. But on the map, it shows it this way. This makes no sense, people. This is called the miseducation of the American mind. The Boston Public Schools now have this map in all their classrooms because it is fair to all the people of the world, and the Northern Hemisphere takes only half of the map, and the Southern half of the hemisphere takes the other half of the map. This is one of the things we can do to change the way children feel about themselves and their world and their place in it. It's time to change education so that it's education instead of indoctrination.
Jane, I want to get to a question from one of our participants. It says, you have said that one needs to practice justice before love. Could you explain?
We are constantly saying to people, we're doing this because we love you. When my father would give us a whipping, and he'd start with the oldest one when there were 5 of us, and he'd go right down to the last one. And he'd give us a whipping, and we'd say, why are you doing this? And my mother would say, your dad's doing this because he loves you. And I'd think, could you love us a little less? People in this country, we do not treat people in a loving way, and we do not furnish them justice. I'd like to form a new society in which you're going to be guaranteed either love or justice. If I guarantee you justice, you might not get love. If I guarantee you love, you might not get justice. Now, I don't know about you, but I would rather be treated fairly than loved, because you cannot treat someone unfairly in a loving way. It isn't possible. We either have love or we don't have love. You can't prove it, but you can prove justice. You can provide justice, you can promise justice, and you can make sure that everyone is treated justly. And you start that by teaching that there's only one race of people on the face of the earth, that we are all 30th to 50th cousins, and that we need to treat one another like members of the family of man. The Bible talks about the family of man. It doesn't talk about the families of man. It talks about the family of man, because we're all members of the same family. And our bodies adjusted to the natural environment over hundreds of thousands of years. And that's the reason for these differences in skin color, in the length of our bones, and the shape of our features, and the kind of hair we have, because of our body's adjustment to the natural environment. It has nothing to do with being God's chosen children. And love is not the answer to these problems. Justice is the answer to these problems, and justice has to be done in a loving way. But justice comes first, in my estimation.
Jane, we're getting a lot of questions, so I want to get to a lot of our
I'll
audience
bet.
questions because they're key. Okay, this comes from Bill. Says it seems that not only did you have profound insight, but you also had the courage to pursue and proclaim your vision. True? And a question mark.
Well, wait a minute. If what I did takes courage, then by the gods of war, what Black men and Black women and parents of Black children, what we call Black children, do every day and every night is where the courage lies. And I want to remind you all of something else. People of color saved our democracy in November by going to the polls in huge numbers to defeat a person who was determined to destroy democracy. And then in January, the people in Georgia, the people of color in Georgia, once again did all of us a huge favor by changing the makeup of the Senate. They did that. They went to the polls no matter how hard it was to get there, no matter how long they had to stand in line, no matter what abuse, verbal abuse they took while they were doing it, no matter the threats against them and their family, they still did it. We owe our democracy right now to the people of color in this nation, and you'd better be aware of that. What was the question?
Okay, let me get back to the question. You know what? I think I might have already clicked out of that question, so you might have to go on to another question. This one comes from Mindy, and it is, what brings you hope?
Oh, what Black people, what brown and Black people, what melanaceous people did during this last election and during the Georgia election. That's what gives me hope. They have proven that they are not what they have been accused of being. They have proven that they are good United States of America citizens. And I don't say good American citizens, because America, and people need to remember this, America is every person who lives from the northernmost point of Canada to the southernmost point of South America. All of the people in here are Americans. America is not just the 48 contiguous states, Alaska, Hawaii, and the islands off the southeastern coast of the United States. All of this is America. We need to start accenting the word united, because what has been happening and is happening right now is someone has decided that we need to be disunited. I suspect that our present president is slightly dyslexic, and when he sees the word united, he thinks it's spelled untied. So he's going to untie this continent, this country. No, this is the United States of America, people, and we have to accent the word united. Stop calling this place America and start calling it the United States of America. We can change this if we choose to. I forgot the question again.
You know what? I got the last question now. So we can go back to the prior question. We're getting this all straight. Okay, the prior question that you really wanted some clarification on was, it seems that not only did you have profound insight, but you also had the courage to pursue and proclaim your vision. True?
No. It doesn't take courage to do what I do. I am a white old woman. You know that.
Why doesn't it take? It seems like it has to take courage, because most people don't go to the strides that you go to and do what you do. I would agree totally with you if more people did it, but the fact that other people are not taking these steps seems to point to a lot of courage.
No, here's what it is. I pray God give me the hindsight to remember where I've been, the foresight to see where I'm going, and the insight to know when I'm going too far. Now, I go too far a lot, but I remember what I've been, I remember what I've done, and I remember what I've read, and I read voraciously because I can't know what being black is like, but I can read about those who do know. I can read things written by people who are Native Americans, and I can realize that I can't know these things automatically. I have to learn them from people who knows them. It doesn't take courage to do what I do. Every time I go on a college campus now, there are those three little boys down there in those red caps that say, "Make America Hate Again." They say "Make America Great Again," but it means "Make America Hate Again." Make no mistake about that. And they're talking while I am. And I stop and I say, "Look, fellas, I know what you're talking about. You guys would like to see me dead because what I'm doing to try to decrease the level of racism in this country. Go ahead, you can shoot me. That's all right. I don't care. My husband and my oldest son are somewhere else, and I'd just as soon be in that other dimension. That won't bother me. But you need to know that if you kill me because of what I do to decrease the level of racism in this country, you might make a martyr out of me, and you might have to spend the rest of your lives celebrating Jane Elliott Day once a year. Now, do you want to do that?" And then they say, "No, no, no." And I say, "Fine, then shut up and listen while I'm talking." It doesn't take courage to say that. It is simply the result of having lived a whole lot of years, probably much longer than I should have, and knowing that there's something better than what is here, and having no fear of death. I've been threatened with death numerous times. I've had a knife pulled on me. I've had a gun pulled on me. They took me out of Uniontown, Pennsylvania. Three carloads of blacks did, to get me out of town before the teachers that I'd put through a very informal blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise, called the superintendent in the afternoon and said, "If you don't get that bitch out of town, we're going to shoot her." So they got me out of town that night. They were scared to death. I
How
wasn't.
many years ago was that? How far back was that?
Oh Lord, that was in 19 probably 75, 76.
Okay.
But last week I got some really nasty mail because these boys, these Proud Boys, and they call themselves what they are, Proud Boys. Men don't behave the way these Proud Boys are behaving. Men don't have to run around in camel gear carrying big guns. Men get what they want by doing the right methods. Threatening to shoot people is not the way a man behaves. But these Proud Boys do, and I've gotten some really nasty letters lately, nasty emails, and I was going to write a book, and I was going to put the nasty letter on one side and a more positive letter on the other side. And then I thought, give those people a platform? I don't think so. So now I just delete those nasty letters. What's nice about computers is you can delete these Proud Boys. And we have the right to delete them. If you don't want me to delete you, just leave me alone.
Okay, I've got a question from Margot. That's a very interesting question that reads, "What is the most effective way to help white people recognize white privilege?" That comes from Margot.
Well, you see, I have a problem. I have a problem with white privilege. The woman who wrote the white privilege paper wrote it in 1987. And at that time, evidently, she didn't realize that there's only one race. And most of the sentences in that paper say, for instance, I can buy a house in the neighborhood I want to live in, and I won't be refused because of my race. I can make a speech, I can make remarks at a meeting and not have my remarks discounted because of my race. My race, my race, my race. Well, if we're all the same race, if it's all based on race, then we all have the same privileges, don't we? Now, there's no such thing as white people. There are melanemic people and there are melanaceous people. But we're all shades of brown. And if you don't believe that, then you get the National Geographic magazine that I just showed you and look at this set of pictures. All different colors of people, but not one the color of this outline, this outline. People do not come in this color. They come in all these shades of brown. White privilege is actually, it should have been called melanemic ignorance, because that's what it is. But we don't want to call it melanemic ignorance. If you're white, you want to be thought of as having privilege because of your race. Well, if you are a member of the human race, then race should have nothing to do with privilege. But if it does have something to do with privilege, then I think we need to remember, and this is the thing, and this is the reason for what happened last week in Washington. People are aware that within the demographics of this country say that within 30 years, white people, melanated people, will have become a numerical minority in the United States of America. And those melanated people are scared to death of what's going to happen to us once people of color get power. That is the major fear that is expressed at every meeting that I go to. I'll never forget the woman in Texas, I think it was the University of Houston, who stood up and said, well, if those people get power, aren't they going to want to do to us what we've done to them? I said, that's your major fear, isn't it? You're afraid they're going to treat you the way we have treated them. Is that right? She said, well, yeah, I do. I said, well, let's see if that's true. And so I said to the group, and there were 1,500 people in the auditorium. Half of them were people of color or melanotic. I said, well, every person in this room who considers himself or herself a member of the black race and who wants to get even with all white folks, please stand. 3 young black males stood. The rest of them all looked at him like, are you crazy? And I said to this woman there, do you feel better now? And she said, I think I do. I said, you're more comfortable now? Yeah, I think I am. I said, fine, but now let's be honest about this. Well, every person in this room who considers himself or herself a member of the black race and who wants to get even with 1 or 2 white people, please stand. They all leaped to their feet, cheering and laughing and high-fiving one another and grinning, just tickled to death. I said, are you still comfortable? She said, well, no, I'm not. I said, now you have something to worry about, don't you? Well, I think I do. I said, what you have to do in the future and in the present, behave in such a way in the present that in the future, they don't remember you as being one of the 1 or 2 they want to get even with. Does that make sense to you? And she said, I guess so. And I said to the group, does that make sense to you? Immediately, all those young black males and females were cheering and laughing and high-fiving one another again. People, don't teach the golden rule and then not practice it. But then I don't believe in the golden rule. I don't believe that I should treat everybody the way I want to be treated. I don't have the right. Go on. You're going to ask a question.
Yeah, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with the golden rule?
Because it's egocentric. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Now, you are a melanotic male, probably taller than I am and definitely younger than I am. Are you sure that you want to be treated the way I want to be treated?
Well, I mean, if you
Well,
treat
yes
me,
or no?
if you treat me well with respect, I would.
No. That's not the question. If
Okay.
you and I get on an airplane,
Right.
and I have a piece of luggage to put in the overhead rack, are you going to say to me, can I put that up for you, ma'am?
Yes.
Yeah, of course you are, because that's the way you think I should be treated. If you have a piece of luggage to put in the overhead rack, and I say, do you want me to put that up for you, Sonny? What are you going to say?
I would say, no, ma'am, I'm good. I'm fine.
I know you would, because you don't want to be treated the way I want to be treated. I don't have the right to treat you the way I want to be treated. I have to treat you the way you want to be treated. And in order to find out how you want to be treated, I have to do some studying and I have to do some research. I think we should practice the platinum rule, which says, do unto others as others would have you do unto them. Now, that doesn't mean that a white woman needs to walk up to the nearest person of color and say, how do you folks want to be treated? And I've heard that very thing happen. That's not what the platinum rule means. The platinum rule means study so that you know what other people are like and you know what their lives are like and you know what kind of culture they come from, what their nationality is, what their belief system is. Don't automatically assume that everybody wants to be treated the way you want to be treated, because I know that there are very few men who want to be treated the way women want to be treated.
Okay. I'm very interested in your background. In the video piece, you spoke about your father and the influence your father had on you. But I'm wondering how you came to be the person you are, whereas so few people, it seems like, have come to the same reality as you have. Tell us a little bit more about your background and your upbringing and how you became the person you are.
Well, I came from a casual Catholic mother and a believing Baptist father. And my mother was disowned by her parents because she married out of the church. And my father was corrected by his mother because he married someone who's Catholic. So I was raised in a situation where, well, my Catholic relatives called us, you'll pardon my French here, but this is what they called us, the dirty little bastards, because obviously we weren't really, we were what you would call a bastard because my mother had married outside the church. So we were sort of our own little unit. I was the middle of 7 children. People who think that birth order doesn't count need to take a look at that. Being the middle of 7 children is not where you want to be. Being the middle person is not easy. I learned a lot about discrimination from our relatives and from those who didn't want to be called our relatives, and from reading, because my father said, get an education. He said, before you go to bed at night, if you haven't learned something new during the day, don't go to sleep until you get something, find something that'll teach you something new. And that's what he did. Every day he learned something he hadn't known before. And he also said, get an education. What you put in your head, they can't take away from you. He went through the Great Depression. He knew about depression. And then, of course, we learned about Hitler from 1933 and 1945. So I learned that. And I learned how not to treat people from my father. I was so lucky to have that man. And then we went to a rural school. So there's a 1-room schoolhouse. So you had kids from kindergarten to 8th grade, all in the same room, being taught by one teacher. It was amazing what we learned from that situation. You learned the 8th grade program. By the time you were gotten to 5th grade, you knew the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade program because you'd heard it all those years. I found out that education is the thing that can free all of us. But I mean education that leads us out of ignorance, not the kind that teaches us that all the famous things that were done, all the wonderful things that were done in this world were done by white males. That's not education, that's indoctrination. I learned that if I want to know more than the teacher does, all I have to do is read 3 books a week, and I will know more than most teachers do. That's the way it is. If you learn the standard elementary curriculum and you have a BA, that's all you need to know. There's so much more than that in this world than what you learned in college. They've done studies in this country that prove that the longer you stay in school, the more bigoted you become. Because the longer you stay in school, the more years you have to have the stuff that you learn K through 12 reinforced over and over and over again. So we have people coming out of college who say Columbus discovered America. I refuse to believe that. My father said, read, educate yourself. Don't believe everything you hear. He said, he also said, and this has led me through life in a very interesting way. A man's judged by the company he keeps, and the best of company is none too good. And that's the way he lived. He could size up another human being in about 3 minutes, and he could tell whether or not that was somebody he wanted to spend time with. He was a very good judge of character, and I learned that from my father. And I learned that the most marvelously wealthy people, many of them are still hopeless racists. And when I told my father that I had read this statement, the upper crust is a bunch of crumbs held together by a lot of dough, he looked at me and his eyebrow went up and he said, that makes sense, Jane. So when he'd see me, he'd say, bunch of held together by a lot of dough. He remembered that the way I remembered everything he ever said to me. I think he was right. So, wealth doesn't necessarily indicate humanity or humanness or humaneness. It sometimes just represents the fact that this is what you cherish.
Yeah.
Wealth is what you cherish. You can't make a child with wealth, but you can deny a child by denying them having wealth. And we do that all day, every day.
Jane, I think that that answer dovetails into a question being asked by Tracy. And she asked, what is the most important thing we can do as individuals to impact racism? So the average person out here in society, whether they're out there on the West Coast where you are or here in Connecticut, what can the average person do to make an impact, to make our society more equitable for everybody?
Refuse to tolerate intolerance. Refuse to go along with racism. Give up the words white and black. Millennials don't like it when I say that because they'll say to me, but we like our group. We like our black and white group. And I say, that's fine if you maintain your color group, but don't consider it a race. Black is not a race. White is not a race. Those are color groups in the human race. So stop talking about yourselves as if you are members of different races. You aren't. Educate your children to recognize that we are all members of the same race. And you start from before the time they're born. And I found out that we start discriminating against you before you're born because a group of registered nurses from Los Angeles called me like 2 years ago and said, we need you to come and talk to our group. I said, what for? She said, we all work in delivery rooms and we want you to come and visit with us. I said, wait a minute. I've been delivered of 4 children in 5 years, but I don't know anything about medicine. I know how they got there and I know how they got out, but I don't know anything about medicine. She said, that's not what we want. I said, what do you want? She said, we are all going to be midwives. And the reason we are becoming midwives is we have all worked and are working in delivery rooms. And we know that Black and brown women don't get the same treatment in delivery rooms that white women do. And we want to be the ones to deliver those babies so that they will all get treated fairly. Now, think about that. Black and brown women don't get the same prenatal care that white women do. And according to these women, and there were probably 50 women in that room when I went in to talk to them, they wanted to hear about racism. They wanted to know how they could recognize it, how they could deal with it, how they could change it, and how they should treat one another in the delivery room, for the love of God. Black women are afraid to go to the delivery room because they don't know what's going to happen to them there. But those women, many of all different shades, said to me, we know what happens there. And we know that not as many Black and brown babies leave the delivery room alive as do white women, white babies. I thought about it before, but I never had it proven to me by the people who are involved in it. How dare we do this? How dare we have people who are afraid to get the vaccine for coronavirus, and it should be called Trump virus, because it would never have gotten as strong as it is if it hadn't been for the ineptitude of our president. How dare we? Now, people of color are afraid to get the vaccine because they aren't sure that it's going to be right. They aren't sure that it's not going to be used to destroy them, because we have proven to them that you can't trust, sometimes you can't trust a white person to take care of you in a just and loving manner. What in the world are we thinking of? How? Go ahead. What's your next question?
Next question comes from one of our attendees. And this person asked, as a parent, I continue to have open conversations with my child about race and discrimination. As a parent, what more can I do that's more active? More active than just having conversations about it.
You invite that child to have children of all colors, come into your home. You expose that child to people of all colors, all nationalities, all faiths, all cultures. You widen that child's world. Do not make the mistake of saying to yourself, I can't have Black children come to my home because the neighbors will be upset. Well, our neighbors were upset a lot in Waterloo, Iowa, because I invited people of color into my home and had no problem doing that. But of course, it changed my relationship with my neighbors. And when they found out what I do for a living, they were quite upset, because I had kicked the crucifix when I said that there's no such thing as a white race or a Black race. We're all members of the same race. I lost a whole lot of friends. You'll lose a whole lot of friends by doing the right thing. But what you do is the right thing. You don't do it because it's expedient. You don't do it for friendships. You don't do it for love of your neighbors. You don't do it for having a better environment in which to raise your children, because face it, in the future, your melanemic children are going to have to take orders from melanotic people. They're going to have to accept those who are different from themselves, and you best start them accepting them as human beings who deserve equitable treatment under the law. They are promised equal treatment under the law in the Constitution. You'd better start treating people equally. And if you teach your kids that only white people are the ones they should have anything to do with, you need to realize, folks, that as the hole in the ozone layer gets larger and larger because of our use of fossil fuels in this country and worldwide, as that hole gets larger and larger, more and more sunlight is being allowed to come into our environment and hit our skins. And people who have lots of melanin in their skins aren't going to suffer from melanoma, which is a skin cancer that you get from overexposure to the sun. Now, the people who get it the most are people who have only a little melanin in their skin. So you people who call yourselves white folks need to realize that in the future, you're going to need more melanin in your children and in your children's children's children. This is going to change this whole situation around very quickly. White people, so-called white people, represent something like 7% of the world's population. 7% of the world's population, people. And our numbers are going down because one of the reasons is we don't have enough melanin in our skin to protect ourselves from the damaging rays of the sun. Think about that.
All right, Jane, this is a very interesting question, I think. It is, how do you address the fact that many people argue that racism will go away if we stop focusing on race and stop talking about race. In other words, I think this person is asking that by talking so much about these issues, it just continues to spiral and people get a little obsessed with the topic.
Yeah, just don't bring it up and it'll go away. Have you done that with cancer? Did we do that with tuberculosis? Are we going to do that with Trump virus? No. You have to talk about this situation. You have to learn about this situation. You have to tell the truth about this situation. And you refuse to go along to get along. You have to discuss the fact that there's only one race. And when we finally get that into our heads, it won't be necessary to talk about race because we will recognize that we are all members of the same race. This whole idea of different races came up in the late 1400s, early 1500s. That's when white and black became a problem. People, white is the color of goodness and purity, black is the color of savagery and bad evil. When you use those two terms, you separate people into groups that you need never have had that separation. Now, those of you who intend to continue to think of yourselves as white or black, and you continue to use the words, the vocabulary that was used in the 14th and 15th century, I challenge you to dress the way they did in the 14th and 15th century, travel the way they did in those centuries, and use the same kinds of communication that they did in those centuries. And I'll be watching the horizon to see smoke signals going up about me all over the place. People, if you're going to use the vocabulary of those two and the ideas of those two centuries, then live the way they did then. And I want to see you men walking around in knee breeches with powdered wigs. And I want to see you women back in corsets so tight that you can't breathe, but you'll be living the way they did in the 14th and 15th century. Either give it all up and come into the 21st century and solve the problems that we created in the 14th and 15th century using the technology that we have today.
Okay, I have a question from Hamlet, and this person might be a teacher just based on this question. And the question reads, what would you tell a teacher that has little to no experience educating children with distinctly different characteristics and experiences than her students?
I would tell the teacher that, number one, I would call her a teacher. I wouldn't call her an educator. I would define educator for her and ask her whether she wanted to be a teacher or an educator to make up her mind. And if she wants to be a teacher, you need to get lower wages, because if you're going to do a lousy job of teaching, you shouldn't be paid so much. If you're going to do a good job of teaching and get involved in some self-education, that person is living with self-imposed ignorance, and she needs to get over it. And she could get over it if you would force her to get over it. If you would say to her, the kinds of remarks that you're making about these children are unjust and in fact illegal. And if you make any more remarks in that vein, I am going to take this to the principal. And if that doesn't work, I'll take it to the superintendent. If this is what I do, I would write down what she's saying. I'd write it down. And I'd be sure that there was somebody else standing there to witness it. And I'd say, now, did you just say this? And if she says, well, yes, I said that, and that's what I mean, then you put the date beside it. You collect 5 of those. And after you get 5 of them, you take them to the person, the principal, and say, now, these are the 5 statements that this person has made in the last week about her students. Now, I would like for you to visit with her about these. And if you take care of this, I won't have to. But if you don't take care of this, I'll take this to the next level, because this is bad for children. Teachers, educators have the responsibility to practice rights, respect, and responsibility, and to be responsible to see to it that children in another classroom aren't abused because of the ignorance of that other educator. You don't have, as one person, you don't have the right to tell her what to do, but you do have the right to write down what she says, ask her if she really meant to say that, and then after you get 5 of those, take it to the principal and say, these are the things that she had said she has the right to say. If she is saying this to the teachers, what is she saying to those students? I want this kind of behavior stopped. And we could stop it if we chose to. I'm not saying be a tattletale. I'm saying be responsible. If she'll say those things in front of her peers, what kinds of things is she saying to her students?
Right.
When, we had coaches, wrestling coaches particular. After the kid goes, I was teaching junior high. After those junior high boys got into wrestling, they were using the word woman, oh, yeah, woman, you, in the hall as a pejorative. And one day I'd had it enough, and I walked out in the hall, I grabbed this tall tall white boy by the front of his shirt, and I slammed him up against the locker. And I said, "Now I want that stopped." And he looked way down here. "Elliot, what's the matter with you?" I said, "I don't want you to use the word woman as a swear word ever again. Do you understand me?" He says, "Geez, Elliot, okay, I won't." I said, "Don't forget it. Okay, I won't." As he walked away, he says, "You better not tangle with her. She doesn't like the word woman." I thought, I don't care. Yeah, I could have lost my job for that, except that the kid was about 6 feet tall, and I'm only 5'1" on a good day. And another thing, he doesn't have the right to use the word woman as an expletive. This is not, being a woman is not something you should use as something ugly. But I was ugly at that point.
In all these cases, though, you've got to have a board of education, you've got to have principals who are willing to do the right thing. And that is not always the case. How do you influence when that happens?
But the way you get to be the one who they won't cross is being really good at what you do. As an educator, I learned how to teach every child to read. I could teach a chair to read if it had a mouth. And because I could teach every child to read, I could have done whatever I wanted to in that school because they didn't want to lose that really wonderful resource. The children in the film, The Eye of the Storm, are all moderately to severely dyslexic. And I had heard them described by the teachers in the teachers' lounge before I got them for third grade. And I thought, oh Lord, don't let me get those kids. And the principal gave me my class roll that year. And he said, "These kids are never going to learn to read. Pass them on, get them out of here." That was the first group. That isn't the ones in The Eye of the Storm. But the first group, that's what the principal told me. And I went to the office and looked through the cumulative files. And I found that in that room, there are a whole lot of kids who had high math scores and low reading and spelling scores. So I knew what I was dealing with. The day I got the class roll for the kids that are in The Eye of the Storm, all of them had high reading, high math scores and low reading and spelling scores. He gave me 16 moderately to severely dyslexic children. He said, "These kids aren't ever going to graduate from high school. Don't worry about it. Do what you can. Nobody else has been able to teach them to read, and neither will you." And I thought, really unkind words. And I decided at that moment that those kids would learn how to read because I know how to teach the dyslexic child. And who has a child, a son, 4 out of 5 dyslexics are males. Now, I didn't say that 4 out of 5 males are dyslexic. I said that if you have a room full of dyslexic, 4 out of 5 of those kids will be male. So what you do is you put the word on the board the first day of school, and you say, "What's that word?" Half of them will say on, a third of them will say no, the others won't say anything. Dyslexic children do not see words the way they're written, and they don't hear words the way they're said. So you have to teach them a special way. I know how to do that. I got away with doing practically anything I wanted to in that system because I could teach every child to read.
So
now, if you want
excellence has its place.
Excellence in education is how you keep your job.
Okay. All right. I have a question from James right here that seems very interesting. It reads, have you been able to break through to any politicians, groups, or government organizations that support your learnings and attempted to influence government-controlled public school curriculum? If so, who and how can we support them?
I haven't tried to do that because I think that you tackle one person at a time. And if I can get enough parents to say to the principal, we have to have all children have to have the right to learn to read. If I could get every principal to agree that every teacher had to take a course in Orton Slingerland phonics so that they could teach every child to read, that's a whole lot more important to me than getting people in positions in high places to do the right thing. I don't have time to mess with those people. I have time. I work with children and their parents. And now, however, I work with people in corporations. And I have, as a result of doing the exercise with several corporations for several years, we changed the tenor of that corporation. They changed the way people behave in that corporation because people of color and women in that corporation said, if you are willing to spend this amount of money, 3 corporations, if you're willing to spend this amount of money to educate people about discrimination and what it does and what it is, we will work as hard as we can because you care about those of us who are different. And that's what we have to do. We have to prove to people that we care about those who are different. We have to prove to people that we recognize the brilliance of those people of very dark skin who populated every landmass on the face of the earth. We have to stop acting as though they are less than, and realize that they have been more than for about 10,000 years on this continent. We have to realize the greatness of those that we have described as being less than. We have to teach the truth. We have to teach the truth to the heads of corporations. I'll never forget the man who came in to the workshop, the blue-eyed, brown-eyed workshop, and he was the cutest thing I ever saw in my life. He had his little tennis sweater tied around his shoulders, and he had lovely wavy white hair. And I thought, oh, you're darling. And then I looked at him, he had blue eyes, and I thought, too bad for you. I didn't know who he was. He just had blue eyes. So I treated him just like another bluey. And when it was over, somebody said, you know who that is that you told to get off his butt and go get his paper? I said, no, I don't know who it is. He's just a bluey to me. That's the CEO. Oh, I thought so. We got in the magic circle. Here they were all sitting there just waiting to see what he was going to do to me. And they were expecting him to cut me to ribbons. And I said, folks, I didn't know who your CEO was, but I've had a good time here for the last three times I've been here. I may never be here again, but thank you for these times. And that man leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and said, Mrs. Elliott, you did exactly the right thing. I didn't want to be treated any better or worse than anyone else was. He said, you don't have to worry about not coming back. We're going to continue this workshop as long as we can.
Now,
And
is
he
that,
wouldn't get,
is that training you were doing, is that traditional anti-bias training? And if it's
I
not,
don't call it anti-bias training.
I'm just using the terminology that
I know it. I know it. And pretty soon you're going to ask me about unconscious and conscious bias. And then you're going to ask me about micro and macro aggressions. And I'm going to say, look, you can solve this problem without polysyllabic words. You can say to a group of people, there is one race on the face of the earth. And I'm going to give you an experience that will let you develop empathy for those who are different from yourself. And the way you do that is walk in one of those people's shoes for a few hours. I want you to walk in the shoes of a person of color in this country for a few hours so that you'll, for an hour and a half, so that you'll find out what it feels like to be treated unfairly on the basis of a physical characteristic over which you have absolutely no control. And I don't have to use polysyllabic words to do it. All I have to say to him is, Bluey, sit down. Bluey, get your pencil. You don't have a pencil, Bluey? Well, that's the way you blue-eyed people are. All you have to do is do what we do in this society on a daily basis. Every melanemic person in this country knows how to be a racist, but not everyone knows how it feels to be on the receiving end of racism. And what I do is give them that experience.
Do you feel like when people go through that exercise that the effects afterwards are long-term, or is it something that they realize at the time, okay, now I'm getting a wake-up call and I appreciate it for this short period of time, and then I'm going to revert back to the ways that I felt for all these many years before? Or does this have a lasting effect on people? What's been your...
Do you think that inoculation against polio has a lasting effect on you?
Yeah, obviously.
Well, that's what this exercise is. It's an inoculation against racism, and it works. And once you have gone through it, when you see somebody behaving in a disgustingly racist way, you take it on and you say to yourself, wait a minute, I've been through that. No, you're not going to do that where I am. And that's what my father did after just seeing the film. After that, you couldn't tell a racist joke around my father. You could tell an Irish joke because we're Irish and we know what we're about. But so you could tell those, but you couldn't tell racist jokes. My father would say, is that what you want to say? Or he'd say, you really want to tell that? Well, I'll see you later. And he'd get up and walk away because he didn't have to put up with that anymore. And he knew that what he was doing was he was contributing to the problem by allowing it to happen. Somebody has said the only thing necessary for the perpetuation of evil is for good people to do nothing. Now, all we have to do as a result of that mess in Washington, D.C. last week is do nothing. And they will continue to do something. What we have to do is say, no, this is not going to be tolerated in my community, not in my home, not in my bedroom. We are not going to tolerate this kind of behavior. This has to stop. If the ugliness is based on your ignorance about skin color, don't blame it on skin color. Skin color is not the problem. Ignorance about skin color is the problem. And the answer to ignorance is education, not training, not teaching, not consulting, education, leading people out of ignorance, and you have to know some of the wonderful things that we have because of people of color in order to appreciate people of color. Now, if you're going to maintain your racism, you give up all the things that people of color have made available for you, like stored blood plasma, like shoes, like the traffic signal, like sugar, like you could fill the room with things that we have gotten from Egypt, and those are people of color, but we choose to put Egypt into the Middle East so that we don't have to admit that those Africans gave us all those wonderful things like math, like writing, like language, like the calendar, and like time measuring devices. Those are some of the things we've gotten from people of color. White people didn't invent those. White people weren't around when those were invented. You need to realize that. But we don't allow teachers to teach that because it will destroy the myth of the rightness of whiteness. It's time to destroy the myth of the rightness of whiteness.
Okay, I've got a question here from Polly that I want to send your way. And this question reads, I heard what you said about privilege, but society does, and she's got does in capital letters, dispense privilege to people with lighter skin every day. So how do we combat this as a light-skinned person?
We educate the light-skinned persons, and we educate those who believe in the rightness of whiteness. And we refuse to accept the definition of people on the basis of the color of their skin. We could do away with this problem if we would educate truthfully. In the Bible, it says, ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set ye free. We could be freed of racism by teaching the truth. Now, privilege. Privilege in that paper is the advantage that we have because of the whiteness of our skin. Within 30 years, white skin is going to be seen as no longer advantageous because we are not, as pale faces, are not going to have the power that we have today. And what are you going to do, pale faces, when you no longer are considered the majority and when you are in fact a numerical minority? You need to realize that the reason we got stuck with a real fool for a president for 4 years was because somebody evidently read to him the book, The Birth Dearth by, and I can't remember his name right now, it doesn't matter, because he wrote a book called The Birth Dearth in which he said that and this was the first paragraph of the first page, the major problem confronting the United States today is there are not enough white babies being born. If we do not change this and change it quickly, white people will no longer be a numerical majority in the United States of America, and this will no longer be a white man's land. That was the first page, the first paragraph of the first page of that book. I went bananas when I read that, and he had put in his book letters from people who disagreed with him, and everybody should have disagreed with him. Evidently somebody read that to our former president, Donosaurus T. Rump, and as a result of that, he built a wall on the southern border of the United States, and he said openly, we've got to keep those brown-skinned people out of here because brown-skinned people reproduce too rapidly. He said that. That's the reason for the wall. Ridiculous. And he also said, we're going to close these Planned Parenthood clinics because the only thing they're for is for white women to get abortions. That's not all Planned Parenthood clinics do. They offer fantastically valuable services to women who couldn't afford those systems if they had to go to the regular medical facilities. You need to know that that person got elected because he played on the prejudices of those who see what's coming in the future and are trying to stop the inevitable from occurring. It is inevitable that we pale faces will lose our numerical majority, but we don't have to lose our power as human beings. And if we would start treating all others as equal human beings, we might be able to get through this problem. We might get into the next century in humane form.
All right, Jane, this is not going to be a surprise to you, but we're getting a lot of questions coming
in. I bet you are.
A lot of questions. Okay, our next question here comes from Barbara. How do you think a 15-minute meeting between you and President Trump might go? I would love to be a fly on the wall.
There would never such a thing occur.
Well,
I would not. No. I can't even imagine it. No, I would not subject myself to 15 minutes with a man who was proud of grabbing women by the crotch. Now, he wouldn't grab me because I don't have the necessary physical characteristics that he would enjoy. So I wouldn't have to worry about that. And he wouldn't have to worry about me grabbing him. But I wouldn't waste my time trying to educate a person who is a case of arrested development. You have three ego states: child, parent, and adult. And if you want to know how you can determine whether a person is in their child, parent, or adult ego state, you get the book TA for Teens, capital T, capital A for Teens. Read it. In that book, there are pages on which these are the things we say in our child ego state. These are the things we say when we're in our parent ego state. These are the things we say when we're in our adult ego state. You read through those statements and you'll find that our present chief executive, never speaks in his adult ego state because he doesn't have one. He is a case of arrested development. You need to realize that. And when you read those statements, when someone is speaking to you or speaking at you or throwing words around, you think to yourself, wait a minute, that person is in her or his parent ego state right now. That person is unwilling to listen to anything anyone else has to say. I'm not going to deal with it. Okay. You wait until he gets into his adult ego state, and sometimes they don't get there.
Okay, let me move on. This question comes from Donna, and she asked, do you talk and work on issues of ageism specifically? You obviously break against stereotypes just by being who you are.
Well, of course I have to talk about ageism. I didn't when I was 35, and I didn't when I was 55, but now I'm 87. And now I know about ageism. And what I know is, if I were an aged Black woman, I wouldn't have the power I have because of people's ignorance about skin color. I know that even though I'm old and have forgotten most of what I ever learned, people will listen to me because of the color of my skin. You know that, and I know that. And you also know that every Black woman in the United States of America has forgotten more since breakfast than I will ever learn about racism. And they are not going to be allowed to talk about it until we change this situation. We have chosen to keep from ourselves the brilliance of Black women for the last 235 years. It's time to put a stop to that. If you want to know the truth, if you want to know the real truth, you talk to any Black woman. It will absolutely amaze you what they know and what I don't.
All right. This question comes from Michael, and it's a very interesting question as well. And Michael asks, has there been any follow-up with the students from the video to assess the long-term impact? If yes, please share. If no, why not?
Well, the reason there hasn't, let me just describe a couple things.
Keep in touch with any of these students over the years?
I keep in touch with those students. They call me often. I keep in touch with them because they will say to me, Mrs. Elliott, the strangest thing just happened. And then they'll tell me something like the mother that called me and said, thank you for what you've done to my child. My mother-in-law always uses the N-word, and my daughter told her to stop it. Those kids that were in that film, The Eye of the Storm, have more common sense now, and common sense in uncommon amounts is what the world calls wisdom. You need to remember that. They have more common sense where race is concerned than any people I've ever known, because they spent an hour and a half, well, they spent a day, each one of them, being in the position of being discriminated against because of the color of their skin. They went into, one of them became, in that group of 16 that weren't supposed to graduate from high school, they all graduated from high school. One of them became a lawyer. Now that's not easy. He became a lawyer. One of them became a junior and senior high school principal for years. And just recently he left the principal job and started a business of his own. They say that to this day, that has made a difference in how they feel about people and how they see people. Look at the film, A Class Divided. We brought those kids back 10 years after graduation and sat them down. They watched the film, The Eye of the Storm, together, and then they discussed what they had learned as a result of that film and how to change their lives. Watch that film. It's PBS did that film, came to Riceville, brought those kids back with their husbands and wives, and a couple of them had children. And they sat in a classroom in the Riceville school and watch that film together. Watch their reactions to that film, and then listen to what they say when they question them about what they learned. You don't, I could tell you, and you wouldn't believe me because it's fantastic. It's wonderful. I am so proud of what they have done and how they have used what they learned. When I do this exercise with people in major corporations, 40 of them at a time, when it's over, white males are crying because they didn't know. I didn't know. I said, really? And why didn't you know? Because I didn't believe it. I didn't think about it. I never thought about it. We have changed corporations and the way they do business because the people who go through the exercise refuse to tolerate racist policies and sexist policies and homophobic policies. We've got to get rid of the idea that, number one, if you're over the age of 50, you don't know anything. If you're over the age of 65, you really are you're a problem for humanity. You need to realize that the older, and oftentimes, the older we get, the more we remember. And the more we remember, the better we are able to help people to get into the next century. People, the reason the film The Eye of the Storm is important is because it was done as a result of my being raised by a father who watched what the Germans did and who thought that it was unfair to judge people by the way they look. Because of that, I did that exercise in 1968. Now, here we are in 2021.
Yep.
2021.
2021.
And and we have had a so-called president for the last 4 years who based his governmental policies on the book that he read about Adolf Hitler. 4 years ago, somebody interviewed me for a newspaper, and I said, what we have going right here, right now, is Hitlerian. And people to whom I said that said, well, you're exaggerating now. That isn't the way it is at all. You read the book, When at Times the Mob is Swayed by Bert Newborn. You read that book, and that will tell you why we elected this fool and what he did after he was elected, why he did it, whose methods he was copying. It will blow you away when you read that book. And here's another book you better read. I know you're going to ask a question, but read the book,
I got a million questions coming in. I just got to tell you.
But I'm an educator, and I believe people have to learn to read. Read the book, The System by Robert Reich. Read the book, The System, and you'll understand what's going on economically. Then read the book, The Myth of Race by Robert Wald Sussman, or go to my website, download the printed materials that are on my website. The first is a set of typical statements that white folks make that think they aren't racist. Go through it, follow the directions, go through it, and then
give me one example. Give me one example from that paper you got up front.
Other ethnic groups had to struggle. Why is it so different for the blacks? Have you heard that one? Yeah, of course you have. That's one of the things we say. Just what do these people want anyway? What do black people want? What do you want? You want to be treated equally under the law. I think that's what you want. Racism exists. Oh, I love this one. Racism, they said in Riceville, when I found out that I was doing the blue, I'd exercise. The people up at the restaurant in the morning, the coffee club, the boys said, why is she doing that exercise in Riceville? We don't have any racism in Riceville. We don't have any N-word. They didn't recognize that using that word without any people of color was racist behavior. Well, that's what, no matter, racism exists only where minorities exist. Remove the minorities and we won't have these problems. The minorities aren't the problem. Ignorance about the minorities is the problem. You need to,
okay, Jane, let me get to another couple of these questions. We have this from Anna, and her question is, I saw your exercise with employees of a prison in a 1985 Frontline documentary when you were reignited with your third graders as adults. Please talk about issues in prisons.
Oh, mercy. A black man in that maximum security prison in upstate New York said, when they asked him after he had seen the film, The Eye of the Storm, with these little white third graders going through the exercise, he said, if they had been doing that when I was in school, I wouldn't be where I am today. And you have to realize that he knew things that white people don't know. And all those young black men who were put in prison because of Bill Clinton's 3 strikes and you're out are still there. And they will be there until we start a war with another country, and then we'll let them out of prison to fight our war. We've done it before and we'll do it again. It is one of the ways we decrease the level of blackness in our society. Have a good war and send black males to fight in that war. And then when they come back, don't let them buy a decent house in the community, because you never know what those black people are going to do when they get in your neighborhood. Read this list of typical statements, then read the clarifications of those typical statements. Then somebody's going to say, well, you brought us a whole lot of problems. You didn't bring us any solutions. Oh, yes, I did. Here's a set of commitments to combat racism. Everybody pick out one of these 18 things, put the date beside.
Where can people find that?
On my website. And Judith Katz, who is the author of these, gave me permission to put this on my website so that people would get their hands on it and would use it. Go to my website, jane@janeelliott.com. Now, if you're going to write me ugly letters, don't bother, because I'll simply delete them. So don't even bother. If you can't think of anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. But get this list of commitments to combat racism, go through them, check yes, the ones that you have done, check no, the ones that you haven't done, then go back, circle one that you check no, put the date beside it, and do it for a month. At the end of the month, wait a minute, at the end of the month, take that paper out, write notes to yourself about what you learned by doing those things, like this one. Have I reevaluated my use of terms, phrases, or behaviors that may be perceived by others as degrading or hurtful? If you haven't, maybe you need to do that. Do that, and then you'll find that many of the things you say are utterly ridiculous. How many of you have ever said, when I see people, I don't see people as black or brown or red or yellow, I just see people as people. But they never put the word white in there, because it's all right to see white. I was standing beside Linda Guillory, black so-called Linda Guillory, who had hired me to work for US West. And some fool young white woman came up on heels about this high, skinny person. I disliked her because she was skinny. And she said to Linda Guillory, Linda, when I see you, I don't see you black. And I backed up because I thought there's going to be bloodshed here and I've got to wear this suit tomorrow. And Linda Guillory looked down at this fool and said, I think you have a severe eye problem. Let's make an appointment with the optometrist so we can get your eyes fixed. That fool diddled away from her faster than she diddled up to her. Now, diddle for me means take short, fast steps. It doesn't mean what you're thinking. She got away from her just as fast as she could. Linda Guillory treated that exactly right. When somebody says to me, I'm colorblind, I say, I knew that before you said it, because if you weren't colorblind, you wouldn't wear that shirt with those pants. And they get angry. I have offended them. Hey, wait a minute. You offended me by saying that you don't see the color of the largest organ on my body, inch for inch, which is my skin. And if you don't see my color and you don't see somebody else's color, you are denying their existence as a human being, because we all started out looking like you, sir.
All right, Jane, let me move on to another question. This one's from John. And he asks, who is going to lead the kind of truth and reconciliation process that seemed to have a positive effect in South America? If that's not a big picture solution, what is?
Every one of you is. Every one of you, every single person listening to my remarks has the power to make changes in themselves, in their family, in their home, in their neighborhood, in their community, in their state, and in their country. Every one of you.
You know,
the only thing
Jane, yeah, John, and I believe this, correcting me, not South America, South Africa was what he wanted to say in that question.
Go to South Africa, because that's where we all came from. Appreciate South Africa. Make it as humane as you possibly can, but you don't do it by forcing them to act white. Let's stop forcing people to act white and let them be what they are. They have the right to live as they choose. One of the major differences, psychologists and sociologists tell us, between people of color and colorless people is, when colorless people come into a new environment, they immediately adjust the environment to fit their needs. When people of color come into a new environment, they immediately adjust their needs to fit the environment, which is the reason we have we're destroying the ozone layer. We've destroyed a whole lot of rivers, and we're back now to destroying rivers as we did previous to our present administration. Right now, we are going right back to where we were before Barack Obama, because the things that Barack Obama put in place to solve out to save our environment, our present so-called president wiped out because they came from the brain of a black man. We can't have that. So where are we now? Los Angeles is now becoming a city that you don't want your kids to go outside in the daytime because they can't breathe, because of him taking away the restrictions, the regulations put on fossil fuel burning material, fossil fuel burning engagements. People, it's time to realize that your skin color ignorance has the ability to destroy your civilization. We are acting in uncivil ways these last 4 years. We have to get back to civility. And you do that one person at a time. And one person at a time can refuse to go along to get along. One person at a time can say to the speaker who's making racist, sexist, ageist, homophobic, ethnocentric remarks, wait a minute. What you just said goes against the grain of everything I have learned, not only in catechism. This is not what I learned as a Muslim. This is not what I learned as all those religions. Every one of them has in that religion the idea that we're all members of the same race. But we do not accent that. We do not want to hear that. We want to hear that there is one group that are superior. This has only been going on since the Spanish Inquisition. The idea of the rightness of whiteness came up during the Spanish Inquisition when Torquemada and company were going around killing people in order to turn them into Catholics. Now, it's the best way to turn somebody to your faith is to kill them. Then you don't have to worry about them. They're really good Catholics after you've done that. They had killed a bunch of Christians before they realized that they'd killed some Christians. So then they decided they had to find a way to determine who deserved to die, who probably wasn't Christian, because you couldn't tell a person's religion by looking at them. But so they set upon skin color as the way to determine whether or not people were probably Christian or not. It made no sense then, and it makes no sense now. You need to realize that this idea has only been around for between 500 and 600 years, the idea of different races. There have always been different cultures, different nationalities, different skin colors, different religions, different sexual orientations, these different ages. These things are age old, but the idea of several different races is a lie. It isn't a myth. It's a lie. A myth is something you make up to explain something, some natural phenomenon that you don't understand. The Greeks had a myth that said the sun was a god in a golden chariot that went across the sky every morning. They finally gave that up after several thousand years. People, the idea of several different races isn't a myth. It's a lie. A lie is something that you make up to justify your unacceptable behaviors. And the idea of different races is a lie, deliberately made up to put people of less color and control. Are you praying? Are you looking up to pray? Okay. You have to realize that it's time to question the lie. It's time to stop telling the lie.
Okay, let me get Jane to our next question, and it reads in white, and this is in parentheses. In white school districts, there is pushback from parents regarding changes in what and how students are being taught, i.e. the truth of Columbus, increased number of books that help students of color see themselves, etc. What advice would you give for addressing these parents and for empowering the educators in quote unquote white districts to make progress in the area of racial equity and inclusion?
You have to remind those parents that you are there to educate your children. You are not there to indoctrinate your children. You are there as an educator to lead students out of ignorance. And the number one ignorance that impacts every facet of our lives is racism. So the number one job that educators have to do is to lead students in such a way that they do not come out of your classroom as ignorant about race as they were when they got there. And if parents don't want that, you need to reassure, you need to tell them what the future says, and you need to say to them, do you want your children to survive in the future? Because if you do, you need to know that they're going to have to learn to get along, to accept, to appreciate, to enjoy those who don't look like they do. Okay. Now, if we can only want to be around those who look like we do, then there will be no more marriages between the sexes, okay? Are you willing to give up marriage between a man and a woman because of the differences? Well, if you are now, Wait until you get to be my age and have lost your husband. And then you'll realize that differences are extremely important, and you don't want to give them up, and you don't want to see them as negatives. Get over it.
All right. Want to get a few more questions, and we're getting up near the deadline, but we keep getting a lot of questions for you, Jane. This one comes from Gibson. As current preschoolers are our future, what advice would you give educators in helping promote a better future in young learners through curriculum?
Get those kids into a preschool in which there are lots of different colored children, people of different color groups. Get them into a preschool in which they learn to appreciate, to get along with, to enjoy those who look different from themselves. Make sure that your child, from the moment that child is born, is exposed to many people of different color groups, different religious groups, different political groups. Make sure that that child sees a plethora of people, not different races because they're all the same race, but different colors and different cultures. Educate that child fully instead of very narrowly, which is what we do in the schools in this country. Get a look at the textbooks. Get a look at the textbooks that they're using in the schools. And if it's the same old nonsense, if in the math books all the story problems have men doing the important things, get a look at the social studies books and find out if they're teaching anti-social studies. And if they are, then all the important things that have ever been done in this country and the world were done by pale, stale males. You have to realize that a whole lot of that leaves out a whole lot of the things that people of color have done. And it leaves out the fact that we are all people of color. If you trace your DNA back far enough, no matter what your color, your skin color is, if you trace your DNA back far enough, you will find that a percentage of your DNA came from a country in Africa. Now, if you want to argue about that, try it, and then send me a letter. Trace it back as far as you possibly can, and you're going to find out the percentage of your DNA, no matter how pale your face is. If you're a human being, some of your DNA came from a country on the continent of Africa. Now think about that, people.
Jane, this is a great question, and it's one I've been thinking about all morning as this discussion's gone on. And the question is from an attendee of the forum, and it goes: so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Can you recommend any school system that has a curriculum that educates about accurate information? In other words, is there a school district that you could identify specifically and say, these people are really doing it right, and that should be the model for other districts around the country when we're educating young people?
I think the Montessori schools are excellent, are wonderful, because they teach children, as far as I know, as if we're all the same race. They're very non-racial about the whole thing. But I don't know of a single public school district or a parochial school district that does a good job of teaching the truth about race. Because you see, most of them are supported by taxpayer funds. Taxpayers are the ones who decide who gets elected to the school board. If a member wants to be on the school board, he or she had better not kick the crucifix by saying we're going to teach the truth about race. If they do, they won't get elected. That's what got our present president elected, was his willingness not to tell the truth about race. So you have to be in the kind of community in which the people have been educated, are self-educated, so that they realize that there's only one race, and they will allow the schools to do the right things. As long as the schools are in the hands of people, for instance, check into the Mercers and see what they're doing about education. It is absolutely terrifying. Check into some of these people who are paying great amounts of money to people like Mr. T. Rump and see what they want to happen in their school systems and in their communities. Read the system and learn about the business roundtable and why. You'll find out why education is the way it is. Because teachers teach what the school board allows them, what the principal and the superintendent allow them to teach, and they are directed by the members of the Board of Education. You've got to get people on the Board of Education who will teach the truth, who insist that the principal and the superintendent the superintendent hires people who will teach the truth, and the principal insists that that's what the educators do. That isn't what we're doing.
Okay, Jane, final question, because we're running up against the clock. And this one comes from Christy, and it says, I'd love to introduce myself to people of color and continue to educate myself, but I live in a very white community. How do I connect? Is it okay to reach out to people on social media or other platforms?
If you reach out and you're rejected, don't be surprised, because they have accepted people who reached out before and then been treated very, very badly by them. We melanemic people don't have a good reputation for how we treat people of color. We reach out with the intention of being their allies. I don't want to be an ally, I want to be a partner. Being allies is a step forward, but partnership is more valuable. It's time for us to stop thinking of white folks as being the ones who are going to bring them into the fold. Nonsense. You need to get out of your fold and get into an area in which there are people who are different from yourself and see if they will accept your ridiculously arrogant, condescending behaviors and words. And too often, when melanemic people go into a situation where there's a problem for people of color, we see ourselves as the saviors. We're not the saviors. We don't know as much as they do. But sometimes we have the necessary monetary things that will help them get along, so they put up with us. I don't want to be tolerated. I want to be appreciated and accepted. But as long as you come into the situation as a savior, stay home. You don't know enough to save those people of color. They've been here longer than you have, and they'll be here long after we're gone. They're going to be the ones who are going to last the longest. People of color are going to be here long after we melanemic people have succumbed to melanoma. So stop thinking, and maybe you're not thinking of yourself as a savior. I want to help these people. No, what you need to do is learn from those folks, because they have forgotten more than you will ever know. You need to ask them to accept you instead of saying, I want to be your friend. I want to be your ally. I want to help you. Nonsense. I will never forget. Oh, Lord. I went to a white privileges conference in Pella, Iowa, several years ago. And the lovely little old lady who wrote the white privileges paper was stood up on the stage in front of an audience, half of which was composed of Black people, and said, I have discovered 24 white privileges that I have because of my skin color. Now, what she should have said was because of the ignorance of the education systems in this country. And as what she said, I want to read you my list of white privileges. And she stood there in front of an audience, 50% of which was composed of Black people, and commenced to read those white privileges. And every one of them had in it saying something about because of my race, because of my race, because of my race. Well, after the first 10, people of color began to get a bit restive, and after the first 15, they had begun to leave. After she had finished reading those 24, then she said, I have discovered 14 more privileges that I have because of my race. And she commenced to read those. And I looked around and I thought, well, Jane, all the smart people have left the room. Why the hell are you still here? And I got up and walked out. I was absolutely furious. Every time she said, because of my race, she pounded another nail in the coffin of their self-respect. You don't have the right to do that. That white privileges paper should have been called melanemic ignorance. And none of those people should have been forced to sit there and listen to it. And they didn't stay. And they shouldn't have stayed. And young Black males drop out of school because they're tired of hearing it. They're tired of being told that they are inferior. Their mothers are tired of having them come home. You send them out of the house in the morning in pretty good shape. You bring them back in the evening all beaten and bruised psychologically, mentally, and emotionally because of instructors who don't see the humanness in those children of color. I refuse to tolerate this, and I refuse to accept it as good educational policy. It isn't. We are creating our own problem with our mouths. Now, I'm going to get a lot of nasty comments about this. Let me tell you something. It's easy to write down nasty words. Instead of writing nasty things to me, read one of the books that I just told you, or just read this one, The Four Agreements. If you haven't read the Four Agreements, just read the Four Agreements. Listen to this. The first agreement, be impeccable with your words. Stop lying to one another about the value of whiteness. The second agreement, don't take anything personally. When you say you want me dead, I won't take that personally. I don't care. The third agreement, don't make assumptions. Don't assume that because somebody has skin of a different color than yours, that he is more or less than you are. The fourth agreement, always do your best. It's time for us to do our best and appreciate the other three agreements and stop treating people unfairly because of our ignorance about skin color. It has to stop. If you're not going to educate, stop funding education when it's really indoctrination. We spend billions of dollars a year to teach the lie of the rightness of whiteness. It's time to put a stop to that. And if that's what your school does, and you want a school that doesn't do that, start your own school.
All right. Jane Elliott, we appreciate your time. We appreciate hearing from you. And I think I speak for everybody in the forum taking part this morning at this breakfast that we're all quite a bit more educated this morning to listen to you. Thank you so much for being
Well,
with us.
you're certainly welcome. I've enjoyed it. Whether or not you have, I really like to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. And now that is a blatant lie. And you can remember that I lie sometimes. That's a lie. But thank you for inviting me. All right.
Thank you very much. Okay, now we're going to go on to our closing comments and a closing prayer. And for that, I want to bring in the Reverend Leroy Perry, the pastor of St. Stephen's AME Church. Reverend?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, great. Jane, you dropped the mic and we are in awe of this presentation. Just truly, truly awesome. I've been given the responsibility of bringing on behalf of the Martin Luther King Breakfast Committee their thanks and appreciation to you for this outstanding conversation that you've given us. I must admit, I had to get a pencil and paper to keep up with all the information that you were giving me, and it just blew my mind. And Keith, you did a tremendous job, man. Remind me never to do that job that you just did today, because it was awesome, and you handled it just so uniquely and so well. We appreciate you. The committee would also like to thank its sponsors and community leaders and participants on the program, members who contributed, and special thanks to Andy Marlatt of the Brandford Rotary for the tremendous job he did designing an eye-catching poster and the wonderful promotional video on Facebook. And finally, for all the Zoom audience who were here today. I've never seen anything like this. I am just truly, this is one of the best breakfasts, and I've been to hundreds as a clergyman. This is one of the best and most informative breakfasts that I've ever been to or in my whole life. And I just want to thank you guys, because it's great. And I want to also thank this Martin Luther King committee that's kept my wife up all night, and the members who are on Zoom, and the hard work that they've done to get this program out to us. And I'm glad that it's recorded, because truly I'm going to send this message to at least 100 people, because I just think it's just got to go viral. It's just an awesome experience. I was thinking, Jane, about justice and love. And one of the things about King, and one of the things that I learned from Paul Tillich, was that you can't have justice without love. You can't have love without justice. It's almost like it's love, justice, and power, but they are integrated into one system. And when I heard you speak tonight, you took me where Dr. King took us when he, in his speech in Mason Temple, and he said, "I've been to the mountaintop, the mountaintop where Moses had went." And when he looked over and he saw the promised land, and what you did today was you brought us into the view of what that promised land would look like. And I'm just so appreciative for that. And may God continue to bless you. You're an awesome lady. You're tough to tangle with. And Brother Kuntz, he handled you so well. I said, "Woo!" He had kid gloves and handkerchiefs out, and it was just awesome.
I needed it all.
You needed it all. Good for you.
It was awesome, truly awesome. I almost wanted to say we just need to pause, and just stop for a moment, because it was so much to digest, and it was an awe moment. You know, it's truly an awe moment. And thank you so much again. At this time, we're going to have, we would like for you to listen to the Brandford High School music makers. They asked me to give a prayer. I don't think we need a prayer. I think y'all just took us to the mountaintop. And I think the Lord is looking down and throwing his kisses and blessings upon us. So you have that from all of us. And thank you again. And now we'll hear from the Brandford High School music makers.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed.
We shall